monkey has become a symbol, like it or not, of the
Well, that happened with Mencken back in 1925.
Journalist H.L. Mencken dubbed Tennessee's most famous court case the Monkey Trial, and the name has stuck ever since. The Scopes trial marking its centennial today, when the city of Dayton was put on the map. I traveled to the rural community to revisit that historic courtroom where Charles Darwin's modern theory and religion went head-to-head.
Welcome to the world's most famous courtroom.
Scopes trial got worldwide publicity.
In July of 1925, a case played out in this rural Tennessee courtroom over the teaching of, at the time, a controversial subject in schools: evolution, the study which found humans had originated from ape-like ancestors.
Consequently, we're still having many of those arguments today.
Rick Dye is the president of the Ray Heritage Preservation Foundation, an independent group that works to celebrate and honor history in the region.
Why Dayton of all places?
Tom Davis, the vice president of the foundation, summarizing the historic Scopes trial in 3 words.
Important, significant, enduring.
The upcoming battle had been facetiously dubbed the Monkey Trial.
In March of 1925, Tennessee became the first state to pass an anti-evolution statute, the Butler Act. It prevented the teaching of any theory that denied the biblical account of creation.
High schools in rural America had only existed for about 20 or 25 years.
The famous case got its legs when the superintendent of a local coal and iron company in Dayton, George Rapelier, hatched a plan to bring publicity to the small city. He noticed an advertisement in the Chattanooga Times from the American Civil Liberties Union looking for a teacher to challenge the Butler Act. A handful of local leaders then sat down with high school teacher John T. Scopes at Robinson's drugstore in Dayton. The group convinced Scopes to incriminate himself and have some of his students testify against him.
The Robinson family gave the Historical Society this table and these chairs from the drugstore, so that was probably sitting there listening to Scopes tell them, I don't remember teaching it, but if you can prove it, I'll do it.
In the basement of the historic Ray County Courthouse, you'll find this museum, prominently displaying the stories of the 2 renowned orators whose influence loomed over the proceedings. William Jennings Bryan of the prosecution argued that science should not dictate moral beliefs. He brought name recognition as a 3-time Democratic Party nominee for the U.S. presidency. And Clarence Darrow for the defense, a well-known lawyer fresh off Chicago's infamous Leopold and Loeb murder case. In the Scopes case, he fought to show the Butler Act was unconstitutional. At one memorable point in the proceedings, Darrow cross-examined Bryan on the lawn of the courthouse in front of onlookers, questioning his arguments in relation to Scripture.
It was Darrow who actually got frustrated because Bryan was doing such a good job of swaying the crowd and deflecting with that humor and not answering those unanswerable questions.
After the closing remarks, Judge Ralston charged the jury.
After 11 days, the jury found John Scopes guilty of teaching evolution. The judge fined Scopes $100, but at the time, a judge could not impose a fine greater than $50. That technicality eventually overturned Scopes' conviction. However, the Butler Act remained in place until 1967. And decades later, parental rights and what is allowed to be taught in classrooms is still debated.
Tennessee just passed a voucher program for school choice. School choice was argued in this room.
We spent, let's say, 75 years letting people tell our story, other people tell our story. In the last 25, 30 years, I think a lot of us have taken the approach, hey, it's our story, we're going to tell it.
Now, something else of note, William Jennings Bryan, the prosecutor who we mentioned, died in Dayton just 5 days after the trial came to an end. This month, the city and Ray County are marking the trial's centennial with several events and festivities, including a theatrical production of the trial and a symposium featuring several historians. Hannah, it was incredible to walk into that original courtroom on the 2nd floor of the historic Ray County Courthouse. We see these film reels from the 20s, and to walk into that same room, it's been freshly renovated, new wood flooring. It was shimmering, and if those walls could talk.
You say if those walls could talk, even if that table could talk. We saw in there that table that was in that drugstore that they all gathered around to initially talk about bringing this case to light.
Right.
But Dane, I mean, we heard there the issue of school choice. This isn't just something that was debated back during this trial that we're seeing here. This is something that's debated to this day. This is something that we talk about on ARC. Talk about the significance of this trial, even in today's day and age.
Well, you have to imagine at that point, Charles Darwin's theory of evolution wasn't that far along. And so a lot was still unknown and the science was still moving along about it. And so at the time, the book of Genesis in the Bible, the idea of divine creation where mankind was made in God's image was taken as fact. And so to have that challenged from Holy Scripture, obviously drew those large crowds and a new form of media that had just evolved, radio. In fact, this was one of the first cases in the entire nation that was broadcast live over radio. A newspaper out of Chicago, WGN, now a well-known TV station, a radio station at that time, traveled all the way to Dayton and rented the AT&T phone lines all the way back to Chicago for $1,000 a day. And to hear voice from across the nation, again, a new idea, and so it kind of took a large part of this this trial. In fact, the courtroom was laid out to have those microphones pick everything up.
Something I think that's also really interesting about this that you mentioned is that it put the city of Dayton on the map, that small rural community getting this national attention from this.
Exactly, and so this continues to this day. A lot of the same debates being held. Something that Rick Dye mentioned that I want to bring up that just stood out to me. He said at 4:30 when court adjourned every day, the arguments were just as passionate as they were today, but people were civil. After the court, they left, they had dinner together, they spoke in a respectful manner, and Rick said in regards to today, a reflection, we just can't seem to find that 4:30 time mark every day, and things are always very divisive and heated. So really, really interesting to look back at that reflection on history.
Definitely great food for thought there, and thank you so much for this piece, Dane. Really, really interesting.